Hello, can you all hear me? Hi guys, it is me, John Fawcett. I'm not John Fawcett. John Fawcett is doing admissions interviews at the minute. Very sorry, everybody online as well. He's not here. He'll be here in an hour though. Thank you very much. We got four very cool talks coming up today. It is my huge pleasure to introduce the very dapper-looking John Kim to give our first talk. Come up here. He's giving on Spectre.
Thank you very much, Ollie. Okay, hello everyone. I'm John, and today I'm going to give you a talk about Spectre. So first, what is Spectre? Boo! It's a ghost. It's not a ghost. Okay, it is what Spectre means, but that's not the Spectre we're talking about today. Okay, so it's not that. Is it the 2015 James Bond movie? It's also not that, obviously. Why don't we ask the all-knowing Wikipedia about it? So Wikipedia says Spectre is one of the two original speculative execution CPU vulnerabilities, the other being Meltdown, which involve microarchitectural side-channel attacks. Okay, so this is the first sentence you get from the Spectre Wikipedia page. Okay, let's look at this. What does this long sentence mean? Okay, first of all, the other being Meltdown. That's the other one. We're talking about Spectre, so ignore that. So what does this mean? There's some big words here that you might not know. Speculative execution, that's a mouthful. What does that mean? Well, it's an optimization technique where a computer system performs a task that may not be needed, commonly used to improve performance. Computer scientists will know, for example, a branch prediction will use speculative execution to execute instructions before it knows whether the branch condition has been met or not. So that's a use case of it. Okay, so this Spectre attack uses some speculative execution aspect of the CPU. Okay, what's a side channel attack? Okay, so a side channel attack. So it's an attack. It's an attack that exploits unintended information leakage from a computer to infer-sensitive information. And side channel you can just swap out with side effect. So any side effect that might occur from some instruction, and we can leak and exploit it to get sensitive data. And microarchitectural, obviously referring to microarchitectural components such as the cache, pipelining, and whatnot. Okay. But before we dive deeper into Spectre, why should you even care about my talk? Why care about Spectre? Well, first of all, we know that it's a vulnerability. It exploits a vulnerability that a CPU has, and we can take some sensitive information, some sensitive data. That's hacking, and well, hacking's fun. Everyone, the concept of hacking is just it's a very fun thing. We're all computer scientists. We all enjoy a bit of hacking. Okay, so this might have piqued your interest, but also Spectre, when it was first discovered in 2018, on a more serious note, it was very impactful and influenced a lot of computers. It was all over the news, and it was a very big deal. In 2018, almost every computer system that used a modern CPU was affected by Spectre, disregarding what type of device it is. And so it was a very influential attack that was discovered. Okay, it seems a bit more interesting. And here in the audience today, we're all computer scientists, And Spectre is very interesting in the sense that it will tickle a computer scientist's brain, because the vulnerability originated not from some bad software code that was pushed by an intern. But it occurred from a fundamental mechanism and design choice of modern CPUs, which is speculative execution. Thousands of computer scientists all peer-reviewed each other and thought this was a great idea. It improves performance. Everything's great. And that's where it originated from. And that's quite scary and very interesting. Okay, so we kind of care about Spectre now. But before we get into the main bulk of my talk, we need some background knowledge. We very briefly touched upon the definition, the Wikipedia definition of Spectre, but we'll first lay out the building blocks that when combined together, make the Spectre attack. So first, speculative execution. We'll dive a bit more deeper into that. Branch prediction, as mentioned earlier, is going to be the speculative execution that Spectre is going to exploit specifically. We're going to learn a bit about caches. I'm sure many of you know what a cache is, but we're going to exploit cache as our microarchitectural component to extract the sensitive data, so we want to know a bit about it. Okay. And in general, the side channel attacks that we're going to use on the cache to extract the data. Okay, so these are the building blocks that will combine to make Spectre. So speculative execution is a performance optimization technique where a CPU executes instructions ahead of time based on predictions about control flow or data dependencies, as we discussed earlier. Okay, so the general process goes, the processor preserves its register states, then predicts which instruction path to take. And then it speculatively executes whichever path it decides it wanted to take before it can be sure which is the correct path. Okay. If the speculation is correct, the pre-executed instructions yield a performance advantage over idling during the wait. Of course, while doing nothing, we do something, and that something happened to be what we were going to do anyways. If the speculation is incorrect, the processor abandons the work it's done by reverting its register states and everything and resuming along the correct path. So theoretically, we lose nothing compared to idling during the wait. So all looks good, right? Well, yeah, actually. Architecturally speaking, everything is good. It maintains the architectural state of the program as if execution followed the correct path. But it may leave microarchitectural elements in a different but still valid state than before the speculative execution. Okay, we're going to talk about the specifics of that later, but keep this in mind. Okay, we're going to first look at a use case of speculative execution, which is branch prediction. It's a use of speculative execution to reduce the cost of conditional branch instructions by predicting the execution path of a program based on the history of branch executions. So this actually talks about a specific branch prediction, which is dynamic branch prediction, but we don't need to get into that. Okay. So you can think about this as if statements. If statements, we know, looks like this. There's some code before, there's an if condition, and then you do something, or you carry on. And if the processor were to reach this line and see it doesn't know whether the condition is true or false, it might think, okay, the last 100 times I did this, I did do something. So I'll do something now and see later on if the condition was met or not, and then either carry on or revert back and carry on. Okay. So that was branch prediction. Okay, leave that aside for a sec. Caches. So we know caches are a hardware component used by the CPU to reduce the average cost to access data from memory. How it does that? Caches are memories that are very small and very fast, located closer to the processor core, and stores each copy of the data from frequently used main memory locations. The data transferred between memory and cache are blocks of fixed size called cache lines. And in the cache, there are cache entries which contain the copied data, the cache line, as well as the requested memory location, called a tag. Again, that's the very brief overview of what cache is. The general process in how caches are actually utilized in a CPU is whenever the processor needs to read or write to a memory location, it first checks whether it exists in the cache. Because if it does, it'll be much quicker to get it from the cache than main memory. If the location is in the cache, we call that a cache hit. If not, a cache miss. Then the CPU, the processor allocates a new cache entry and copies the data into cache, then does what it needs to do. If the cache is full on a cache miss, the cache will evict an existing entry to make room using some replacement policy. And that's a different talk. Okay, so kind of the interesting part, hacking. Microarchitectural side channel attacks. The changes in the Okay, so the changes in the microarchitectural state caused by the behavior 1 program may affect other programs. Obviously, of course. A great example could be the L3 cache, which is shared by different processor cores, and if one affects the L3 cache, the other one will be affected by it in some capacity. Yeah. And potentially this may allow for unintended leakage of sensitive information. To give a few examples, we can use timing attacks on caches and measuring power usage, etc. This is a very, very, very vague slide on purpose because we're going to focus on one particular side channel attack, which is going to be a timing attack on the cache. So this particular attack that we're going to focus on is called flush and reload. So first, how it works is the attacker flushes a cache line from a cache that is shared with the victim. And this is going to be the target cache line. Then the attacker lets the victim program run, execute for a while, does what it needs to do. This may be monitored in some way or not, but lets it run. Then the attacker measures the time it takes to perform a memory read at the address corresponding to the flush cache line, which was the targeted cache line earlier. And you might infer that if the victim has accessed this particular cache line, then it'll be a fast read, as it would be already brought into cache by the victim. So, and if the victim did not access it, then it'll be slow because we would have to fetch it from main memory. And what this allows the attacker to know that the victim doesn't know it's sharing is the attacker learns whether the victim has accessed this particular cache line in a given time period. Okay. So this is the side channel attack that we're going to use. And you might be wondering, how is this going to give us the actual data? We only know if they've accessed it or not. Well, we'll see how it all relates to each other in a second. Actually, right now. Okay, so the attack overview. So this is just going to be a general idea of all Spectre attacks. So I did forget to mention that Spectre is a family of different attacks that utilize the basic principle that, of speculative execution, perhaps changing a microarchitectural state and using a side channel attack to exploit that. Okay, so the attack consists of 3 phases: the setup phase, attack phase, and data retrieval phase. So in the setup phase, we want to mistrain the branch predictor so that it will later make an exploitable, erroneous speculative execution. This is the basis of Spectre attack, and it was also mentioned by the Wikipedia definition. Okay. To help with this, we can include in the setup phase manipulating the cache state to exclude the data that will determine the control flow. We can think of this as the branch condition. So if you think about the if statement, if that statement was in a register, for example, if the condition was in a register, the CPU would not need speculative execution, as it already knows whether which path to take. So at the setup phase, we can actually put that in main memory such that the processor will have to speculatively execute. And also here, we want to set up for the covert channel. So the covert channel being the side channel that's going to give us the data. So the setup for the covert channel used to extract the victim's data will occur here too, which is going to be the first part of flush and reload, the flushing of the cache line. Okay. So this is setting up the attack. The attack phase is going to be, so the attack phase is going to start when the attacker requests the victim to perform a certain action that induces the erroneous speculative execution that we set up in the last phase. Think of it as that if statement. This will trigger the processor to speculatively, or ideally we want this to trigger the processor to speculatively read a memory location, a memory value at some address, which will most likely be the monitored cache line from earlier, that will modify the cache state in a way that exposes the value. So right now, and data retrieval is going to be recovering the data in the case for flush and reload, timing measurements to see which cache line was read by the victim or not. Okay, so this is very vague. This is very confusing, and it's for good reason because so it was vague for a reason because it had to it had to consider every single variation of Spectre. But if you focus on a single variation of Spectre, which is Spectre v1, the first Spectre found, the big daddy of Spectres. So putting everything we know all together, we get Spectre variant 1, which exploits conditional branch misprediction. Let's say we have this victim function that we are going to exploit. This victim function has an argument x, and it checks if x is less than array 1 size. If it is, then it stores into temp this line of code here. So we'll go over this in a second, the specifics of why this is in this particular way. So let's talk about what x is first, from the attacker's perspective. X is the address, the secret byte that we want to read, the address of the secret byte we want to read, minus the base address of array 1. So we can think of it as starting from the base of array 1, the location of that particular byte we want to extract from the victim. And array 2 is a very big array chosen by the attacker. It has to be larger than this particular size, and we'll see why in a second. Okay. So the setup here for this is that array 1 size is uncached because we want that if condition to be speculatively executed, and so we want the processor to not have that information when it runs this instruction in order to induce speculative execution. Array 2 is also uncached, which we'll see in a second, but array 1x is cached so that the line within the if block, which is dependent on array 1x, that instruction can run as soon as possible, while the processor is still unsure about which branch it should have taken. Okay, so as I said, array 1 is the address from array x is the address from array 1 of the secret byte we want to read. So array 1x is going to be the secret byte. It's going to give us the secret byte. And we use array 1x as the index into array 2, which array 2 is some cache that we've prepared to extract the data. Okay, so we use array 1x, the secret byte itself, as an index. And we times it by per cache line size. We times it by the cache line size. So what this is doing is we've flushed out array 2 from the cache. We don't have any of the values of array 2. If we call this, and inside the inner block of the if statement runs, let's say array 1x, the secret byte is k. So k times the cache line size is indexed into array 2. That means the kth, if we think about array 2 as an array divided up into cache lines, right? So if you call a particular index in array 2, that particular cache line will be brought up into the cache, because we know that data is transferred between memory and the cache in blocks of fixed size of cache line. We can use that. So we can use that fact to use a timing attack to see which cache line block of array 2 was read by the victim. Okay? So hang on with me for a second. So let's say this ran, the speculative execution ran. Only array 2 of this index will be in the cache. If we were to measure the time it takes to read at array 2, 0, array 2, 1 cache line size, array 2, 2 cache line size, array 2, 3 cache line size, and so on, only one of them is going to be very fast to read. And which index is that? It's going to be this. So by going over every single cache line that could have been pulled from array 2 and seeing which one has already been pulled into cache, we get the index of that cache line, and that index itself is the secret byte. If you're still confused, well, you're in luck. We have a demo. Okay, so I think this, okay, I think I need to exit this. Okay, I'll make it a bit bigger. Is that okay? Yeah, okay. So, we'll first look at the victim side. The victim code is gonna be the function that we saw earlier, basically. This is just some initializing of the arrays. Here, the array is sufficiently large enough to hold a bunch of cache lines. And this is, the array 1 could be of anything. Array 2 can also be anything. Its contents can be anything, because we only care about the index of array 2. And this is the secret character that's going to be on adjacent to array 1 in memory. Not necessarily adjacent to, but what the location of x is going to be based on. So this is the secret character that we're trying to read. John Fawcett is the best DOS ever. He's not here, but he is. He's in our hearts. Okay, so the analysis code consists of complicated C, but okay. So this function is reading the memory byte. Here we can see we have a results array, which will come in a sec. And then we have training x and x. That's all we need to care about for now. So when we call this function, we initially zero out our results array. Then we try 999 times. It could be 1, but it's just for accuracy's sake. We flush array 2, as we said, because we want only one part of array 2 to be brought into the cache line by the speculative execution, as the index of that cache line will be our secret data. Okay, here it says 5 trainings per attack run. As we said earlier, the setup phase includes us mistraining the branch predictor. So here I decided on doing 5 x's that are within, that are less than array 1 size, in order to make the branch predictor think that the next one, the 6th one, is also going to be return true for that if statement. Here we go. Yeah, and this is just ensuring that whatever training x value we use is going to be less than the array 1 size. It mods, so it can't ever be larger than array 1 size. So this for loop is basically running 5 training x's and 1 malicious x, a total of 5 times. If you count, that's 60. Initially flushes array 1 size because we want that speculative execution to be induced by this processor not being able to tell whether x is lesser than array 1 size. This is a delay, or you can use a fence here as well, just to ensure that array 1 size is flushed before we get into calling the victim function. And here, this is just some weird code, just making sure that there'll be 5 training data for every 1 malicious x. So you see this, yeah. So this is what we're trying to do. If this particular j in the for loop is not mod 6, 0, then we want to set it to a training x, and if it is, so for every 6th one, we want a malicious x. And then we call the victim function with that x. Okay, so this is how you read the time. All this is doing is just getting the time interval between starting the read and actually getting the data. And here we see that whatever time we get, so first, if it is less than the cache hit threshold, that I defined as a macro here, it's just 70. Then, okay, this could be a cache hit. This is quick enough. And also, this is just ensuring that this particular attempt was not a training data attempt. if you see tries mod array 1 size is how we got training X earlier. So it's just ensuring that we're not, so it was a cache hit, but it was a cache hit on a non-malicious X, a training X that we did. And if this condition is met, then whatever, so this mix I is actually, so it's the index of array 2. What I mean by this is, what this for loop does is it goes over every chunk, cache line chunks in array 2 and calls them in order. It doesn't call them in order, it actually mixes it up, but it calls each one. And measuring the time it takes to read whatever cache line that was brought up from array 2. And seeing if there's one that's significantly quick enough that we can think, okay, so this was a cache hit, meaning that the victim called this particular index, this particular cache line from the array 2. And it increments the results. And obviously this runs a bunch of times, 999 times. And what this does is just locates the best scoring and the second best scoring index into array 2. And here, this is a check to see if our test was successful or not. This is just, so results J contains the best scoring. Results K is the second best scoring. This is based on some heuristics I just fiddled around with. This is just some significance test. And this is some edge case that needs to be considered. But basically, if the best performing index is significant enough, then we can call it a success. And then it just stores the location and the actual byte into these arrays that we're going to look in main. Okay, so main, it just runs the code, basically. It runs this read memory byte. It just reads memory byte, and this prints out the values. There are also some logic here. So what this does is it ensures that the byte that we read was a character byte. That's what it does. And one thing I did change from the original code is that I made sure if the best performing byte was not a character byte, I just printed out the second best, because in most cases the second best is actually the first best and the second best are actually quite similar, and it's one of the two. Okay, so let's just run it and see if it can give us that secret string that we want to extract. I think I've already compiled it actually. Example. Okay, so here, this is the location of this byte. It's J, O, H, and John. Fawcett is the best DOS ever. Okay, so we've successfully extracted the secret bytes that are outside any of our memory cores, and it should not have been able to extract it because of this particular if statement restricting us from accessing outside the bounds of the array, array 1, but we have managed to anyways. So that was a very brief, very easy example, just to show proof of concept of Spectre. Limitations of Spectre. Just to wrap things up, so it uses cache timing attacks, such as flush and reload, to retrieve the victim data, and this can have limited accuracy. This depends on the resolution of your timer. This depends on many different aspects where measuring the time may not be applicable. Errors can also occur if array 2 elements become cached unexpectedly by some, for example, by hardware prefetching operating system activities or other processes that access array 2. And that won't allow us to do the timing attack. But, this kind of messed up here because it wasn't supposed to be perfect the first try. But as seen from the demo, as not seen from the demo, but through repetition, errors can be reduced and accurate data can be retrieved with high certainty. Oh, I guess the for loop running 999 times is a demonstration of this particular point. There are other variations of Spectre. We've only talked about variation 1. Variation 2 exploits branch target injection. It uses indirect branches instead of conditional branches to jump to a particular code in the program that allows for side channel attacks. And Spectre 4, which is called Speculative Store Bypass. So it's basically it's a store and a load instruction back to back, and that store will take some time because it's data dependent in some way or control flow dependent in some way, and speculatively the processor can speculatively execute that load instruction before that store has been fulfilled, which will extract the previous data that should not, in theory, be there because of the store before. And some microarchitectural side channel attack will be used to extract this data. So as I said earlier, Spectre was a really big deal. It affected every modern CPU that uses speculative execution and has a cache, which is pretty much most of them. Mitigations that were taking place, software mitigations were first because they were obviously easier to implement. For variant 1, patches that automatically implemented a fence after a conditional branch instruction, ensuring that speculative execution does not occur in a conditional branch, were implemented by Intel, AMD, all of the processor manufacturers. For variation 2, there's this thing called repelines, which is a combination word with return and trampoline. It's really interesting. You should really take a look at it, which basically replaces indirect jump instructions with an infinitely looping fence and then pause instruction in the return stack buffer until the processor can know whether this jump should be taken or not. This loop basically utilizes the fact that the return stack buffer is a lot easier to manipulate with firmware with code compared to a branch target buffer, and so it's a very clever answer to a difficult problem. And for hardware, obviously, they changed everything. They had to change everything because every CPU was exploitable. They mainly did it by strengthening the partition between privileges. It was mainly to target V2, which was used to access kernel mode data from user mode. But V1 was a lot harder to mitigate and took many more years. But the thing to note is that all of these mitigation caused performance trade-offs because it restricted speculative execution in some way. And that, obviously, the performance enhancements that were taken with speculative execution were taken away. And funnily enough, this led to 32 lawsuits against Intel, not because of the vulnerability, but because of the mitigations that had to be taken place. So I think there are some lessons to learn from Spectre. The main issue was that computer scientists were too myopic to consider the potential risks of altered microarchitectural states due to speculative execution. And this can be dissected in two different ways. Even verified, trusted, fundamental hardware designs are not immune to vulnerabilities. Everything was proven theoretically. All the architectural logic made sense, the control flow made sense, but we must think outside the box, I think, is what that's trying to say. And this was a quote by Paul Kocher, who was a co-discoverer of Spectre. He said that he hoped that this was a wake-up call from over-prioritizing performance over security for far too long in the processor industry. And I think he was quite right about that. See, these are my references, and thank you for listening. Do you have any questions?
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. That was super cool. Any questions? I'll come hand the microphone over.
So thanks for the talk. Your example program was very much not the typical. Normally, you're not writing the program that you're trying to exploit, right?
Of course.
How does this apply to, say, stealing passwords from a web browser?
Okay.
Can you do
so
something?
That's a very good question. So obviously, if you look, if we look back in our code, If you look back at our code, we wrote the victim code, and obviously as attackers, we're not going to write the victim code. So basically, what the victim has to do is, in whatever victim program that we're trying to exploit, we want to find a particular function or particular fragment, code fragment, such that passing an argument into it will induce any kind of microarchitectural state change. In most cases, this was some use of the cache lines. Because most actual programs are massive, a lot of attackers, actually most attackers were able to find some code fragment that will induce this behavior. And so yeah, the function found in the victim's code was used to exploit this. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the talk. Other than branch prediction, are there other forms of speculative execution that Spectre or other attacks might exploit?
So, okay, wait, let me actually use my slides. So actually, Spectre, as I said, is a group of vulnerabilities that can be exploited. And all of Spectre's, so Spectre is defined to be any vulnerability originating from speculative execution. So technically, there is no Spectre attack that doesn't exploit speculative execution, as Spectre is defined to be a speculative execution vulnerability. But obviously, there are many, many different ways to access data without using speculative execution. Think of any other security attack, SQL injection, Heartbleed, and whatnot, to name a few. But yeah, by how Spectre is defined to be, every Spectre attack will exploit speculative execution in some way.
Sure, but are there any other forms other than branch prediction?
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood the question. Sorry. Other than branch prediction, so I guess this could be a good time to talk about Meltdown. Meltdown was found with Spectre and is often referred to as Spectre variant 3. So I have a slide for it as well. So Meltdown actually utilizes out-of-order execution, speculative execution, that is not based on branch prediction. It's just utilizing the outer order. It's exploiting that. If we so I don't have some code, but if we had some line of code that would cause an exception, and there's other lines of code afterwards, we can exploit out-of-order execution such that the lines of code after the exception causing line can be ran before the exception is actually handled. So this is what Meltdown uses. So if we execute a memory read at a privileged location, at kernel memory, this should be an exception because you're not allowed to do that. But before the processor can realize to raise an exception and recall the instruction, out-of-order execution we can exploit it by, in a similar way to what we did with Spectre, use whatever data that we read at this privileged location into some index and an array in the line afterwards, that might run before the exception is handled due to out-of-order execution. And so through that and through a side channel attack, we can get some privileged data from kernel memory.
That's fine. Thank you, Rich.
Yeah.
Cool. Anyone else? Awesome. Okay, I think I'll let you write your feedback then while we get the next speaker set up. Thank you very much, John. Another round of applause, please.